Thank you for tuning in to the Forward Together podcast, an extension of Forward Summit where we bring Indigenous communities together with Canadian industry leaders to spark meaningful conversations. We host some of the most inspiring voices and powerful leaders you'll hear anywhere. And now those conversations continue year-round right here on the podcast. I'm your host, Rod Miller, and I have the privilege of sitting down with these incredible guests, sharing their teachings, their stories, and their vision for advancing Indigenous prosperity and building a stronger Canadian economy for all. This is the Forward Together podcast because the path to a stronger Canada is one we walk together. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Forward Together podcast. My name is Rod Miller. I am your host for this Forward Together session, and I am thrilled today to be welcoming someone who I consider to be a friend. He is a friend of the Forward Summit, Workforce Forward programs, and a friend of what we do, and it's so wonderful to have him join us today. And Colby is a distinguished Métis entrepreneur and governance expert who has dedicated really over 30 years to building Indigenous economic empowerment through strategic business development, mentorship, and innovative partnerships. He's the president of the Imagination Group, Inc., which I'm really excited to talk about today, and co-founder and chairperson of Influencing Mentoring Society. Colby has established himself as a transformational leader in advancing Indigenous prosperity across Canada, and I am thrilled to dig into the conversation today with Colby. So Colby, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you in the podcast today.
Thanks so much, Rod. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I know you and I have met before, and we've chatted, and one of the things that I was absolutely inspired by with you was the work that you've done from an entrepreneurial perspective. And I had a chance to dig into your bio a little bit, and I understand that you were an entrepreneur at a very young age. And I guess my first question to you is, what was that like for you when you were young to begin and just to start as an entrepreneur? And then how has that changed over the years? And I won't say the number, over the many years that you've been doing this work. How's that changed over the years and evolved for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I lately, over the last year or so, a number of years, but this past year, I've had a little bit of been receiving some accolades for this point in my life that I'm in with my professional career. 31 years an entrepreneur, became an entrepreneur at 18. So, it's not typical, not that others haven't done it, but it's not typical. I think I became an entrepreneur for a number of factors that all came together at once. I had either worked for companies or found sort of like handyman work from the age of 14 to 18 in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
So I had already sort of had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit at that point, trying to make money. But I had planned on going to university for architecture. And as you hear from some people, misspent youth, getting myself into trouble, and school was never difficult for me. I think I was someone who needed to be kept very busy.
Right.
And, came from a single parent household. So, there's limited time. And not that was the issue. I just, I was just someone who was going to push the boundaries. So I think there was this intersectionality of me having some early failures in my life that had real impact. My understanding of some of the things that I was actually very good at, and a true belief in myself that if I wanted to start something, I could do it. And my mother wasn't impressed that I didn't go to post-secondary. That was something that at that point, she hadn't gone to post-secondary yet, right? It wasn't afforded to her because of the circumstances that she came out of. And I kind of squandered the opportunity that I had. And it wasn't lack of academic achievement. I could have easily gone in that sense. But when I decided that I was going to start a window cleaning company. And what's interesting about a window cleaning venture is that it has very little overhead. It has very little upfront costs, but it pays very well. Right. So I could make about $600 a day at 18.
Wow.
right?
Wow.
So it was good. It was a great business. It wasn't one that I found invigorating,
Right.
but it was one that I could get into. But when I got started, I with someone who didn't have any entrepreneurial experience, I knew certain things. I knew I needed business cards. I
Mm.
knew I needed something for marketing. I knew I needed to look professional. So I had this day where all this stuff came together. My business cards, the decals for my vehicle, the ladders that I needed to go up houses and buildings. I had these little business card holders. They look like it was like a greeting card,
Right.
had my logo on the front of it, and it was a big maroon circle with a C and a D cut into the circle. And when you opened it up, there was a spot to put the business card in, and it said, Codell and crew would like to thank you for your business. Right. So I'm 18, right? It's like, yeah, that's great. So I've got all these things, and my mother has a 4-level split. Still lives in the same house. And,
Hmm.
I'm bringing this stuff into the house, and she's home from work, and I've got this stuff on her front steps of the going up to the living room, and I'm showing her all this stuff. And I was proud, right? I was proud that
Mm.
I'd done this. And in 1994, there was no Vistaprint. Like this
Right.
was
Yeah.
like I had to design this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
and there was no design software. Like this was a very different time.
Right.
So I'm showing her all this stuff, and I could see with her, there was this moment where I could see maybe that initial disappointment sort of fade away, and she
Yeah.
realized that, oh no, this guy's serious. Like he wants to do this, and he's
Yeah.
going to do it. And yeah, I think that's really how everything kicked off.
That's it's a great story. I can envision the maroon holder. What you're looking back on that experience as an entrepreneur and that first kind of getting out there and doing your thing. What were the lessons that taught you that's impacted you today? Because I want to talk more about Imagination Group, but what were some of the early lessons that you learned as an entrepreneur that affected you in your later career?
Leadership, how to
Mm,
be a good leader.
mm,
I had always played a lot of sports, so
mm.
you learn how to be a team player. Uh, Depending what role you have in organized sport, you might learn how to be a leader.
Right.
Um, but I had to learn to be a good boss, and
Mm,
I wasn't in the early days. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm very particular. I'm very prepared. I,
mm.
I, I like things to be done a certain way. Well, you can imagine when you're younger, none of these things have subsided. They're all brand new, and you're
Yeah.
like you're like Attila the Hun. Like you're just you're very you're at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
So I was harsh. I was a
Mm,
harsh leader. Um, I was an intelligent guy. Knew a fair bit for my age, and I had people working for me who were older,
mm,
and I had no tolerance for people who didn't know what they were doing. In the construction industry, in North America, we typically attract the majority of people who that's their only option. Much different than it is in Europe, where people actually go to university to become construction
mm.
individuals, practitioners. So I had guys 27, 29 years old who didn't know how to use a tape measure properly. And I was harsh. I was very harsh in terms of judging where they were at. And I'm sure I had very choice words and a little rough around the edges myself. So I had to learn about leadership. I had a lot to learn about preparedness
Mm.
and taking responsibility. Some of the greatest failures I've had in business were in those first 7 years. It's where I lost money because I had clients who wouldn't pay. I had to learn how to sue people or decide not to sue people. Um, just a lot of things where I always felt like they did this to me. And there was validity in that statement, but I didn't understand that a part of being a good business owner was being prepared for certain eventualities or potential
Hmm.
eventualities. So I
Hmm.
think it was those two things that I learned the most in the first couple of years.
Interesting. As a follow up to that, I know that the Métis people are well known for their entrepreneurship and their understanding of business. How has your heritage, your culture of being Métis informed you as an entrepreneur?
I think it's built in. I don't think I think it's something I had to learn and hone,
Mm,
but don't think I think there when people come to me and they want advice or they want me to informally mentor them in their new ventures, I will make the statement and say, you'll know if you're an entrepreneur, within the first few years or definitely in the first five. And they'll say, well, what is that? And I'll say, well, when things get tough, if you're thinking about going and getting a job, you're not an entrepreneur.
right, right.
Or if you have a business that fails 10 years in, 5 years in, you're a true entrepreneur says, okay, what's my next business? And it's not for everyone, as much as leadership is not for everyone. I think we all believe that over a certain amount of time, we should just naturally move into leadership positions. And we do that. It's a Western construct that we follow, but it's not right. There's a lot of people who are not good leaders. So I would say for Métis people, and I think when they talk about us being, the people who lived in the margins,
Mm,
we had to learn to be ingenuitive.
yeah,
And whether it's something that's built into our genes, or maybe it's that generational transfer of I don't like using the word trauma, but maybe those experiences that our families had, our
right.
grandparents had, have actually set up the way that we approach the world, which maybe prepares us to be entrepreneurs more naturally, to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, wow, that's a very interesting statement. Interesting. I know one of your businesses, and this is what this is why I wanted to go for coffee and talk more, but we're going to do it now. We'll still do coffee. Tell us about the Imagination Group. So what is the Imagination Group? What do you do? How'd that get started? Give us a sense of that. And then the follow-up on that's going to be, how does that impact Indigenous economic development and cultural preservation? So tell us about the group and what you do and the impact it has.
Yeah, so Imagination, we actually our first business, the name of our company first was was Imagination Cards Inc.
Mm,
My mother, Dr. Marie Delorme, was finishing up her executive MBA at Queen's University. At the time, she was an AVP at TELUS. She ran the human resource department, and it was at the same time that TELUS and BC Tel merged. Although TELUS maintained its name,
mm,
the executive team there really ended up being made up of BC Tel employees, not TELUS employees.
mm.
So she ended up being in a position where, there wasn't really a place for her. So she finished up her MBA. But as in most MBA programs, you have some sort of a project that you do at the end. And she had created a business plan for sort of like an executive retreat, a very expensive venture, about $2.5 million to launch at the time. And this was in 2000, and said, really want to do this. I think she did her investigating, found that maybe not the easiest thing to do, but she had this really interesting thing that happened. She used to buy Leaning Tree uh, Christmas cards or greeting cards to
Yeah,
use at Christmas.
yeah.
And she had sent them out. Well, of course, in 2000, some of this Indigenous conversation, especially around joint ventures and set asides and things of that nature, they were there, they were being talked about, but it's really mandate driven and they weren't really effective. But the conversation started. She sent out her greeting cards, and in one day, she received either 4 phone calls or a combination of phone calls and emails saying, I have never seen these cards before. Like, where did you get these? And she had an epiphany. and she thought, you know what? I think there is a need. There's a gap here. I'm buying something that's an American product. It's not even
Right.
Canadian. Maybe there's an opportunity. So she finished her MBA and she took the next 9 months and built the business plan for Imagination Cards Inc. And, she's very good at this type of thing. So she went through the process. And at the time, I was running my construction company,
Mm.
and she had never been an entrepreneur, and she'd never asked me questions about how do you price? How do you do different things? So I became one of her mentors in
Wow.
building the business, and she built a whole team of people that helped her. And of course, she did all this investigating to build the business plan. And 9 months later, she launched a greeting card line with about 60 images, and she sold 43,000 greeting cards that first Christmas in the first 2 months of the business opening.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah, it's fantastic. Like, it's just a great story, but she was very deliberate. Like, this was not happenstance. She planned this thing. So that was the start of the business. I helped her. And 2 years later, I really wanted out of construction. I had had some really bad clients. I was also really affected by this approach we have in North America around the stigma of being in construction, and that it was a lesser of,
Yeah.
the job opportunities or sectors to be in. And it's not the same today. I think we still have a little bit of that stigma, but it's better today. It's more of a corporate feel, some of these larger businesses. So I joined. We probably weren't ready for me to join. I still had a lot to learn, a different style of business, but I had really good business acumen at this point. I had 7, 8 years of business. But what we decided to do is expand. So the company moved into creating corporate wares with the same Indigenous imagery on it. And our organization for 19 years paid a royalty on every single card or product that we sold back to the artist whose copyright
Wow.
agreement that we had entered into.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was a great, loved it, great business. But unfortunately, probably from the first day our company started, r- paper reproduction art was already on the decline.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we were seeing, like, every time we fought to get, more of the market, we were really just maintaining, that where we were currently at. It's difficult. And of course, you're paying artists royalties, and we're talking about pennies on the dollar, right? By the time we ended, I think we were paying them 25 cents a card, but it's not a lot of money. But the costs we had far outweighed the profitability of it. So it was a tough business, but one where there's so many unique things in it. There's a lot to learn. We ended up, running that business, I said, for about 19 years. It's still the same business we have today, but we moved out of greeting cards, moved out of the type of gifts that we were producing. And we had been running our consulting practice from the first year in. So we have a business consulting firm. We do a lot of strategic planning, a lot of governance work, a lot of research, HR style work, primarily for First Nations all across Canada. So great organization, definitely where you make the majority of your money. But in 2015, we wanted to resell tobacco. So we wanted to resell our competitors' tobacco. They didn't produce enough. So we had already spent a lot of money getting the rights, all the licenses to be able to resell. So I didn't want to lose that $20,000 investment, and decided that we would become our own manufacturer. Now, if I had had enough business acumen to understand that the tobacco business was going to cost me $1 million to get into, I probably would have let go of the 20 grand very easily. So yeah. So now we have a tobacco manufacturing company. that's 95% automated. We can talk a little bit more about that later, but very unique business. We have a gift line to the business, and we use it to promote our tobacco because you
Mm.
can't legally market
Promote. Yeah.
tobacco. So
Yeah.
we can market product, and then people see the tobacco once they're in our environment. And then we have a growing consulting practice that is just it's a fantastic part of our business. It's really what allows us to help our community be equals at the table and to put themselves in a position that the acumen of business is growing so that they can create strong economic futures for themselves.
You know, I remember you and I chatting at one of the recent Forward Summit meetings, and you shared with me, you were walking me through the tobacco manufacturing and production line that you had, and you mentioned the word $1 million. I'm like, oh my gosh, like who'd have thought that how much it would cost? But it sounds as though you've made the switch now into like tobacco is kind of, one of your core products that you offer in addition to the services that you offer. Is there an Indigenous economic prosperity component to that tobacco? So how do you source it? Where do you source it from? What do you give back to certain communities on that as well too? So tell us a bit more about that, because it sounds as though tobacco plays a really important role in your business.
Yeah, it does. It's the very first part of our business that's had a really strong cultural and traditional tie to our community. It's the very first business that I've ever started where I asked for permission to start it. Went to elders, went to community, went to knowledge keepers in order to find out if this would be appropriate and if I were the person who could do it. It started a far more intensive cultural journey for me, being in ceremony, living my life in a certain way. I've always lived a healthy lifestyle, but I'm very intentional about doing that now. That's more staying away from substances and things of that nature, just being a person who can actually handle a medicine and not affect the intentionality of it. So I think the tobacco itself, the part that is most significant is when we launched it as an educational tool. Not only is it there to fulfill protocol in the right way, but we wanted the users to understand why they were using it, how to use it, and to seek out further knowledge. And we think that that's still the role that we play. And it's probably the most important component of it. And it's not just non-Indigenous people who don't know this. We have a lot of people in our own community who either ceremony wasn't a part of their lives, or they are new to coming into community, or they're in an urban setting where just happenstance they're not a part of it. So I think that's for me probably is the most important component of it. And in order for us to maintain the intentionality of the tobacco, we went to a really Western approach of packaging in order to ensure that we had less people handling the tobacco, so that the person's own intentions,
Right.
wherever they're at, we don't have to be so mindful or have
Right.
everyone be so mindful in the production of it. Only one person touches the tobacco, and by the time anyone else is in contact with it, it already has a plastic bag around it.
Right.
So we've
And then
really
most likely
done a nice
handed in
job.
ceremony to that
That's
person
right.
too, right? So there's deep intention behind that, I would imagine.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the way we care for the tobacco is smudged weekly. We smudge whenever we manufacture it, whenever we touch it. So even our tobacco has a very different smell to it because of the amount that it's smudged over its life. And some of our tobacco is 7 years old that we're manufacturing right now.
Wow.
So tobacco ages incredibly well.
Yeah.
So it's only getting more and more and more that prayer driven into it, and
Right.
that actual healing property driven
Right.
into it. It's a beautiful, like, I'm not a different person, but the way I'm walking through life is different as
Is
a result
different.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I have I would say the honor and the pleasure on my shelf right up there. I have got a can of your tobacco, and it's part of my smudge practice. So, thank you for that story, for the deep intentionality, and congratulations on the millions of dollars, the payoff that's going to
Thanks.
come with that.
Yeah,
One of the
hopefully.
things, one of the things that I remember seeing you on stage at Forge Summit, and it was with the youth, and I was just so impressed with the work that you've done with youth. And I was unaware that you had co-founded the Influence Mentoring Society. I'd love to take a few minutes to talk a bit about that. How did that begin? And was there gaps you identified, or tell me a bit about that and the impact that that has had on the youth in particular?
Yeah. So there was a group of us, a fairly large group in Calgary that was a part of an organization called um, the Urban Aboriginal Initiative, Kauai, Calgary Aboriginal Initiative, Urban Initiative, and it had 8 domains. So what it was there to do was to address the barriers that Indigenous people in the Calgary urban setting faced
Hmm.
across all different walks of their life. There was about 6 or 7 of us that was a part of the employment domain. And what we did is we hosted events and, sort of like an annual conference where it was about conversation. How do we bring people together to share their experiences, what they're doing, and how do we drive best practices, right? How do we sort of all move together? And what we were finding was the environment that we created was really wonderful, but it was lacking some sort of a deliverable.
Mm.
And I think even the funding that they ended up losing that was coming from the city of Calgary, spoke to that, what is it that you're achieving? And everyone had the best of intentions. I really think a lot of great stuff happened there. And it was there long before our group had all joined. Um, a fellow named Bruce Randall joined the organization, community champion, just loves helping people. And Bruce is one of these people who walks in to a room and he starts making friends
Right.
immediately, right? He wants to know about your background, to tell you about his, what do you do? And he's like trying to create connection
Right.
immediately. He's like, well, I know somebody, I'm going to get you connected. And so, you're in this room, and I remember we're meeting at this guy named Jay's office, and I'm like, man, this guy's got energy. And so he said, oh, we should have coffee. Well, Bruce was the inaugural executive director for a mentorship program called CRYAC in Calgary, and it's for newcomer professionals coming into Calgary. And they'll take a lawyer and put them together with a lawyer in Calgary to help shorten the gestation period to them getting into their chosen field. Great idea. Bruce ended up running that organization for 13 years. And he said, I think there's an opportunity to create a mentorship program within the Indigenous community. So this influence, the beginning of it was Bruce's idea. So Bruce started having all these meetings with people across Calgary. And it was funny. He had a meeting with Marie, but it wasn't through me, right? Like, this is how this guy connects, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
So 3 of us, Bruce, myself, and a fellow named Jay Garrettson, started having more robust conversations about this. And just by chance, Alberta Human Services had reached out to Kauai and said, do you have any shovel-ready projects? We've got some funding to get rid of. And they knew that we were talking about influence. We didn't have
Right.
a name
Yeah.
for it, but we were talking about it. And they gave us $50,000, and we used that to conduct a research project.
Wow.
We researched all across Canada, outside of Canada, and we identified the gaps. So this was in 2014. About a year after that, Kauai was dissolved. So kind of sad. But we moved this forward. And what we had identified at the time, the greatest gap was there was nothing for support for most Indigenous post-secondary students. There was stuff before as youth, and then there was something once you were in business or you were an entrepreneur, but there's nothing that sort of bridged the gap. So we decided that's what we would do. So this mentorship program, very similar to what I described with CRYAC, it's national in focus. We are mentoring only Indigenous post-secondary students. Now, our definition of post-secondary is any type of continuing education. And that individual could be any age. We want to make sure that we can play a role in breaking down some of the barriers and and helping them to create social capital.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I understand that, name drop here a little bit. I understand that Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively donated $250,000 to Influence Mentoring Society in 2021.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. Tell us about that. That's a really cool story.
Yeah, it was interesting, right? All of us are in COVID, and we're having, you're trying to navigate this. And of course, some people weren't that busy and figuring things out. Our company was, Imagination was just as busy as ever, but we weren't traveling. And that was really different for us. So we had some extra time. Marie wanted a new deck. So I'm over at her house building a deck. And I get a text message from someone that we know and says, have a high, didn't say celebrity, just said basically a very important person who is interested in Indigenous issues and wants to have a conversation with someone who can lead them through this. And and that was basically about it. Would you be open to that? And what she wanted was Marie's contact info, right? Because Marie's the one who's, incredibly well known. I said, yeah, absolutely. Like Marie knew this person. So we shared the contact info, had a quick conversation, but didn't say who it was. Just basically shared the same thoughts. Well, if you can believe it, right, so we're building the deck and Marie's helping me, right? Let's build this deck. And she gets a phone call. She was told that she would get a phone call. So she gets a phone call. She goes, has the phone out on the deck, ends up going inside, Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
And
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And, Ryan was talking about the conversation that he and Blake were having. This was in the height of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matters.
Yeah.
And, they had been donating money all across the states, trying to counteract, some of these issues and address some of these disparities.
Yeah.
And they, Ryan said they were talking and he said, we got the same issue in Canada, but it's more of an Indigenous issue.
Yeah.
So they were interested. How could we help or play any role? Like, what is it? Well, what's needed? So Marie stewarded those conversations, and Ryan and Blake did a lot of work across Canada, and we're looking for advice on what type of organizations, who. They had criteria for that. And so, Marie was bringing forward all these organizations, and her and I were talking about it. Who do we think, is a good fit based on the criteria? And we were putting Influence forward at the same time because it fit the criteria that they had. And we ended up being the third organization that they chose to support. And it was, I can't give you the details, but what I can tell you is if you've heard anything negative about the two of them, and unfortunately they've got some things happening right now, none of that's true. These are unbelievable people. Trusting, caring, like down to earth, amazing people. And it's not because I got money. They are just incredibly special people and genuine. And I don't use that term lightly. I only meet so many people that I think are genuine. And they're the epitome of it. And we've had the opportunity of meeting Ryan in person and a couple of their daughters.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah, they're really good people. So yeah, we were very lucky. And Ryan, if it wasn't for Ryan, Influence wouldn't be in existence, or most likely wouldn't be operating where it is. The problem in the not-for-profit sector is anything that's new, somebody has to move first. And a
Right.
lot of organizations, especially in the corporate environment, and was our issue in 2014, is we went into this big oil crisis. There was no money anywhere.
Right.
But TD Bank was going to support us, but they wanted matching dollars, and we
Right.
couldn't find the matching
Couldn't
dollars.
find the matching dollars. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ryan's comments to me was, "We believe in you. Just go do it."
Man, that's incredible. And it is interesting because we see certain things in the media, and it's wonderful for you to share that story. And I know our listeners are going to eat it up because it does speak to the commitment to humanity. He's a Canadian. Like, it speaks to all of that, of who this individual is. And it sounds to me like there's this real values alignment and connection as well to the work that you do at Influence. You mentioned something about corporate, which leads me to a question. Congratulations, by the way, on Inspire Award, which was I think fairly recent. You've also completed your ICD designation. I think some of this stuff is, well, if not all of this stuff is deeply cultural in the fabric of an organization. When we think about Indigenous economic prosperity and inclusion, your role now as a board director, your thoughts as a board director, how important is the role that the board plays on ensuring that we see progress in Indigenous economic prosperity and inclusion? What role does the board play?
Yeah, I'm just going to touch on something to lead into that. I've watched a lot of different people in our community take, an activist position or a business approach or not-for-profit social approach. And, for a lot of years, I had judgment and said, I don't think that's the way we're going to move forward. Like, that's not the way I would approach something. And I've had this complete reversal of thought and realizing that everything plays a role. Everyone plays a role in propelling us forward. And we're on a wave right now, right? It's been a really slow building wave, but it's got some movement. And I think I like that idea that all the most important changes have happened through activism. Right? That was the first move that occurred. You look at maybe really our rights truly being recognized in Canada, probably really launched off of Oka, right? That's it. It's a big move there.
Yeah, and that was decades ago. Like, that was a long time ago, right? Yeah,
absolutely. But look at the power that the Six Nations has. Yeah, that's all because of Oka.
Yeah.
So I recognize that. So I've looked, and if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have told you it's the people at the boardroom tables that are making the real change. And I don't agree with that now. I think it's an important component of it. And I think the role that it plays is that, first of all, we need a voice there, right? We probably started out with token positions so that now people are just getting used to seeing us at a table. Then it extends out to we actually have a voice at the table. Now we're in a position where some people who are Indigenous are actually leading those tables. The next part that I think what we're trying to evoke and what we're trying to move to is policy change. And I think a lot of people would say, well, we do have policy change right now. It's already occurring. And I'd say, yeah, we are building a new policy to add to the other policies. It's called an Indigenous policy or an Indigenous relations policy, whatever it is. But we have not yet had Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and the true inclusion of Indigenous people and
Mm-hmm.
culture throughout policy. And the
Mm-hmm.
only
Mm-hmm.
reason why we're having a conversation right now about the concern of EDI and TRC calls to action and UNDRIP is because they're not in policy yet.
Right.
And even the organizations that, are making reconciliation plans have still not put that into policy. So, and they'll say, yeah, we have. I said, no, you have an Indigenous policy.
Right.
But
Right.
we would be having the same conversation about the rights of women unless women were now seen as people across all policy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'd still be fighting. And I'd say they're still fighting for rights, but
Yeah.
not in the same way we are for Indigenous or BIPOC people.
Right. Right. Well said.
So,
Well said.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's where I think that's where, from a corporate standpoint, that's where we can evoke change.
So it sounds to me like a stewardship of what is important for the organization to do, particularly at the board or the senior level, kind of stewarding that change away from, let's say, just straight, here's our Indigenous policy, to here's that integrated holistic policy that takes in culture, worldviews, all those things that are important to integrate within your entire policy framework as an organization.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very well articulated.
So we're coming to the last question, and
Okay.
and I think about the incredible blend of what you do around being an entrepreneur, but also the commitment you have, and I would even say it's a passion around mentorship. What advice would you give to Indigenous entrepreneurs who are just beginning to start their journey? And from your perspective, how important is that role of mentor to help them be successful?
Yeah, I think it's imperative.
Mm,
And I think I'm not crazy about the term mentee. That's why we use the term protege at
mm,
Influence.
yeah,
Um, you know, but I think mentee, protege, I think that it has to be led by them. So they have to understand the impact or what it takes to prepare for whatever it is that you want to do in life.
right.
Start a business, get through post-secondary, or maybe just improve within your own professional development within your own career. And I think mentors come in so many different shapes and sizes. It could be your psychiatrist. It could be a formal mentor. It could be your grandfather. It could be another business owner. But I think all this collection of people, which I like to call my own personal board of directors, that's the
Mm-hmm,
way I refer to them.
mm-hmm,
Those are the experts that I go back to. I'm looking at doing this. What do you think? Or
yeah,
they're sharing their thoughts of how they see the world. I think that individual needs to see the opportunity that's all around them and say, I'm going to put myself in a position to be the best version of myself that I can be. And I think that's maybe a little catchy,
mm,
that
mm-hmm,
concept, but I think it's really true. I think very few of us have been successful, through without any sort of help or any sort of guidance along the way. And from an Indigenous perspective, I think it's a very, elder protege
yeah,
approach to thing, that
yeah,
transference of knowledge. And I've already always told people, and it's how I was successful in my construction company, is people love sharing information if they realize they know something that you don't know.
that's true.
So all the pricing I did on jobs was because people would tell me how they did stuff. And I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, this is fantastic, right? Um, but I think if I were telling a new person who's becoming an entrepreneur, I would suggest, if they don't have like an MBA, I would suggest taking on an entrepreneurial course.
yeah,
I highly suggest this, and I've done it a lot. Take a long time building your business plan. And I
right,
tell them we took 9 months to build ours. And if you have a job, I would keep your job for the first 2 or 3 years of that business,
mm,
and I would let it build up. And as it grows, hire people to do the work and only get into it once you feel like it's solid. And everyone says when you hit the 5-year mark, your business is set. That's bullshit. It's 10 years.
It's 10.
It's 10, and even at 10, if COVID hits on the 10th year, you're done anyways.
Yeah, right.
So, I think, and I talk about this for our people in general, especially youth, and it all comes around preparedness.
Yeah.
You need to be prepared. You need to put the right foot forward so that you are in control of your destiny. This is something no one else can do it for you. And if you do that work, you will mitigate most of the challenges that you're going to run into, or you're going to have a way to deal with them more effectively.
Wow, that's awesome. Colby, I just want to take a moment. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be with us and to share your wisdom and your journey and the stories of your mom and the stories of Ryan and Blake and all that. I think it's a really amazing stories. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your authenticity, and I appreciate you joining us today. Thanks for being part of the podcast.
No, thank you, Rod. I really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Thank you for joining us on the Forward Together podcast. These conversations share the voices, stories, and teachings that are shaping Indigenous prosperity and strengthening Canada's economy. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if your company would like to support and amplify these important conversations, connect with our media partner, the Davis Media Company, publisher of Forward Magazine, to explore sponsorship opportunities. And of course, the best way to experience these conversations is in person. Join us at Forward Summit East in Ontario, October 8th and 9th, where Indigenous communities and industry leaders come together to build relationships, share knowledge, and create lasting partnerships. It's an incredible opportunity to learn, to listen, and to be part of Canada's journey toward a stronger, more inclusive economy. Let's keep listening, learning, and walking this path. Forward together.